exercise so that I knew whenever I was on the surface, I had to watch my back because there are predator species on the surface of Mars. Was this affirmed by my paper in 2008? Yes. My paper shows evidence not just of predation of humanoids by reptoids on Mars, but mass predation of humanoids by reptoids on Mars. In fact, in 10214 and in 11049, I've isolated details of reptoid creatures literally, in one case, eating a human, and in another case, guarding a recently killed human. So humanoids are not on the top of the food chain on Mars, and that's another aspect of Martian ecology that's going to be difficult for human beings on Earth to accept. But Mars is essentially like life on Earth would be if the carnivorous reptile species like plesiosaurs, or let's say even the smaller dinosaurs, survived, so that occasionally, or rather frequently it would seem, they eat humanoids. So that's now been established by my experiences on the surface, and if people don't choose to believe that I was on Mars, which in fact I was, I'm telling the truth. We have had a capability that has been placing people on Mars via teleportation since at least 1981, because that's when I went up there. More recently, we have the claim made by the brilliant young researcher David Wilcock that there are 600,000 personnel on Mars, well, from Earth. I have no reason to discount that because I was sent up there 28 years ago, and we got there in about 5 minutes from this jump room at this particular CIA facility in El Segundo. So I don't doubt David's claim because we certainly had 3 decades now to place U.S. personnel and potentially chrononauts from other nations on Earth on the surface of Mars, and I'm going to continue to tell the truth and share what I know and bear witness to what happened. I have been on the surface of Mars, and I was there without specialized clothing, and during the latter half of the first trip and during the whole second trip without any kind of specialized breathing apparatus. Mars has an atmosphere. It has both humanoids like us and humanoids unlike us, and it has a variety of different animal species, both animals that resemble animals presently on Earth, or animals that used to be on Earth and that are now extinct, or animals that have never existed on Earth because they're hybrids of different existing Earth species. The plesiosaurs, for example, that are on Mars, such animals did not survive the KT extinction on Earth. So what we can begin to derive in terms of our understanding of biology on Mars is that Martian life forms are both similar to and diverge from life forms on Earth, which may be an important paleological finding in the sense that it shows that life forms on both planets seem to have emerged from a common origin, but that at some point, in prehistory, the 2 planets diverged, and yet modern humans are on both planets, but there are species on Mars that are extinct in our age on planet Earth. So that was 1982. That was 26 years before I wrote The Discovery of Life on Mars. The question is, well, why didn't you talk about the fact that you teleported to Mars when you wrote your paper? And that's simply because the fact that I had been on Mars was irrelevant when I wrote the paper. If you look at the structure of the paper is a work of natural history that seeks to prove a single postulate, and that is that Mars is an inhabited planet. My subjective claim, or anybody else's subjective claim, that they've been placed on Mars via the advanced teleportation capabilities of the permanent secret government, the U.S. intelligence community, the U.S. military-industrial complex, as President Eisenhower called it, is irrelevant to the case I make in the paper that Mars is inhabited. The reason I wrote the paper the way I did, and I didn't talk about, first of all, I didn't want to blend or just alter the story based on a narration of the fact that the very story I was telling I had been told about when I was a kid. So I couldn't do that. That was off the shelf, off the table. And then I pondered whether I should talk about the fact that I had been on Mars, and I thought, well, look, people are going to have enough difficulty believing the case I'm making in this paper that Mars is inhabited. I won't talk about myself or my experiences. I'll talk about what the evidence shows. I'll make a legal case a natural history case for life on Mars, which is what I did in the paper. So
I find your personal story more interesting.
Well, I know, and it may be more significant, but the value of the paper, and the reason I structured it the way I did, is it's basically a work of natural science or even belletristic literature in which I present the photos and what the photos mean. So separate and apart from any subjective claim I would make that I and others have already been to Mars, even somebody skeptical of that position can at least embrace the data. They can investigate the data in my paper and say, I think this author did prove that Mars is inhabited. So then I can now that paper has been published, I can now share with others some of the backstory of the fact that I was not only aware of my destiny as the author of that paper, but in fact, I have been on Mars because the U.S. government has been sending people there for decades. Now, the reason I think I was sent, I think, Jessica, I should just address why I was sent, and then maybe I can field some of your questions. The reason I think I was sent is not they were planning for me to be permanent personnel on Mars or, become an astronaut or whatever you would, I guess chrononaut is the term I've been using, because our space personnel or CIA personnel have been getting to Mars via teleportation rather than rocketry. So we're really not astronauts. We've really been chrononauts. Without these breakthroughs in time-space physics, we simply would not have gotten there yet. But anyway, the reason I think I was sent up there is for the same reasons that I was briefed in childhood about the authorship of the paper. They wanted me to be familiar with the data. Because when I was up there, for example, I interacted with humans up there. I had met human Martians as a kid at Curtis Wright, but I met U.S. personnel up there. I met the hybrid. I saw some of the other hybrids that are up there. They're actually, I show in my paper the Scorpion Man, who's a hybrid between a human being and like a Helgermite or scorpion. And we had an encounter with a carnivore, namely a plesiosaur. Now, whether that was a setup or not, I don't know, but at least that taught me in a very frightening way that there are predator species on the surface of Mars. Now, the last Mars data point that is relevant to my publication of the paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars in 2008, dates from 1997. This is already, God, I can't even believe it. This is already 16 years after I was on the surface of Mars as a 19-year-old. After I completed my law school and graduate education, I had attended Northwestern School of Law of Lewis and Clark College up in Portland, Oregon. I had studied urban planning at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and earned my degree with distinction. And then I had spent a year studying environmental law and policy under the tutelage of Malcolm Grant at Cambridge. So I then came back to the U.S. in 95, 96 timeframe, and I was studying for the Washington Bar, which I ultimately passed in July of 1996. Around that time, my mother, in 1996-97, my mother developed breast cancer, and I began to take care of her beginning in 1997. And from that time until around 2003, I was really invested substantially in taking care of my mother and doing things for her and also protecting her. And one of the things I had done was I commissioned the building of 2 gates on the left and right side of her home in Chatsworth. I wanted the original gates that had been there to be fortified so we could lock them and lock the backyard so that a burglar couldn't get access to the back of the house when she was there. So we commissioned some carpentry from a friend of mine. I don't want to identify this person by name, but he's somebody who is a brilliant U.S. academic. I don't even want to give his field, but he's a brilliant U.S. academic who, because of his birth and upbringing in a sensitive European capital, had been offered, in the mid-90s, had been offered the station chief position in one of Europe's most sensitive cities at that time, in the mid-90s. Again, I don't want to say what city it was because I want to protect this individual. He helped me a lot, and we had an agreement that I wouldn't reveal his identity. But he was studying his social science field at a California university, and he was recruited